Fiona, firstly, thank you for joining us on the Housing Collective podcast. For the listeners, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself and your organisation?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Fiona Fletcher-Smith and I'm Group Chief Executive for L&Q. L&Q is a housing association. We are one of the largest in the country. We have about 120,000 homes, everywhere from Preston down to Medway and Kent, over into East Anglia, over as far as Warwickshire. So national organisation now. Predominantly though, bulk of our homes, the stock is still in London and the South East, but we have an increasing presence in the North West following our acquisition of Trafford Housing Trust. So we are a £39 billion business with a turnover of about £1 billion, about 4,500 staff. We, as I say, we manage 120,000 homes, but we also are one of the largest housing association developers. So last year we built about 4,000 new homes. This year we're probably going to build about 3,000 and aim to keep building about 3,000 homes per year. We've got plots for about 100,000 homes already in ownership. So we will keep trying to solve the housing crisis for the UK. So that's my leadership of L&Q.
That is fantastic. Great. Thank you, Fiona. And can you share with us a bit about your journey of becoming Chief Executive of L&Q as well?
I worked as a temp for L&Q when I was doing my degree. Really? I needed a summer job, signed on with an agency in London, and they sent me to this fabulous organisation called L&Q. Yeah, I spent 2 summers while I was an undergraduate working as a temporary housing officer for L&Q. Fell in love with them. They were just an amazing organisation, and then sort of gradually watched their change and their increase in size really over a number of decades. And then I'd sort of moved away from housing in my career. I'd moved into local government. So I did lots of things like managing bins in Hackney, looking after planning services, and then did about a decade at City Hall in London, running development, planning, environmental policy, transport policy, economic policy. So really wide range of things, everything except housing. And then I was approached to apply for the job of development director at L&Q in 2018. And the first thing I said is, I don't really know much about development other than from a planning point of view. But what David and the board were actually looking for is a development director with more rounded experience. So, yeah, I fitted the bill, joined L&Q in June 2018, so almost 5 years now. And then 3 years later, I was honoured, really, to get the job of chief exec, because it's definitely one of the best jobs in housing.
I agree. It's a fantastic role that you've currently got, albeit very busy as well, Fiona, as you said at the beginning. But just keen to go back into your background and from my research and our conversations over the years is that you've had so many different roles, from kind of being a temp at L&Q all those years ago to housing officer at Westminster to an executive at the GLA, right through to the role that you're doing today. So as a leader, what are the changes you've incorporated across those different roles? And also, how have you had to adapt your leadership style to be successful in those roles?
Oh, brilliant question. I think one of the things that always strikes me is a lot of people downplay or underplay work in the public sector. And the bulk of my career has been in the public sector. And I think it's unfair to do that, because what the public sector actually teaches you is an incredible range of skills as a leader. First of all, you are leading very complex organisations with lots of different priorities. You're often doing that in a financially constrained way. So it breeds creativity and resilience in terms of your leadership style. Also, working with politicians is absolutely, at one end of the scale, absolutely inspiring and brilliant, and at the other end, really quite difficult. And if you can work with politicians in a very positive way, it's a brilliant skill to have. And what working with politicians has taught me is around transparency, it's around collaboration, it's around problem solving, and trying to do that looking at things from lots of different angles. I mean, Somebody will be elected for a particular political party, will have motivations from their manifesto, and you as a public servant your job is to speak truth unto power and to help them to deliver their manifesto in an appropriate way. They're really connected with their local communities, so it's also, as a leader, it's really important to listen to, in the case of local government, your citizens, in this role, your customers, and that listening hard enough most of the time to be able to change your mind when you need to is another fantastic skill. So the one sort of message I'd give people is don't undervalue any experience you have in the public sector. And if you haven't worked in the public sector, you should think about doing a stint in some shape or form to sort of hone those skills. I know at L&Q, I spend a lot of time sort of explaining how it is really important to engage with local politicians because they matter. They are the democratically elected voice of people in a neighbourhood, an area that you're working in. So you've got to listen. You've got to understand what they're motivated by. Yeah. So how have I had to change and adapt? I think one of the big things that is really hitting me now is resilience. I think we've heard an awful lot about burnout. We've heard a lot about whether it's Nicola Sturgeon or Jacinta Ardern at political level, just saying I have nothing left in the tank. I think the housing sector at the moment is rightfully under an awful lot of scrutiny, and what that scrutiny can bring is a lot of stress for people. So one thing we're very clear about at L&Q is our well-being for all our colleagues right across the business. And particularly our leaders, and just making sure that you are able to cope. Because if you aren't resilient and looking after your own well-being, you're not going to be able to look after either your team or the customers you serve. So resilience is something that I think it's always been important, but I think I'm far more conscious of the impact of people not being resilient.
I think that is something, and from a recruitment perspective, Fiona, that's something that we're really keen on testing. But out of interest, you mentioned there around resilience, and that's something that we really have to test with leaders in the sector when we're interviewing them for new roles. From your perspective, how do you test resilience when you're taking people through an interview process?
It's a great question, Tom, and I don't think we're there yet in terms of being able to do that. One of the questions I always like is to get people to tell a story about when something went wrong in their careers and how they dealt with it. The people who say, "Oh, nothing's ever gone wrong." Well, sorry, you're not what I need. I need people who have coped with failure, with difficult situations. People, frankly, who've been through the ringer a bit and have come out the other side and have learned from that. Because I can't remember who came up with this quote, but calm seas don't make for good sailors. So I want people who've really, really been through it. And it's those stories can be really quite telling. If people have come out of a poor situation not learning anything, they're not building up their own resilience, they're not contributing to their self-awareness that can help with resilience. But I definitely think there's more work to be done in this area, absolutely.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And we certainly don't have the magic bullet ourselves, Fiona, to be completely honest, but it's like you say there, it's testing of when they fail, but also how they dust themselves off and started again, but also motivated their teams as well to do exactly that. And talking about resilience to a certain extent as well, and you were appointed chief executive back in 2021 or at the beginning of 2021. How did you find yourself elevating yourself into that chief executive role when your peers then became your direct reports?
Well, the first thing to say is succession planning at L&Q is really strong. David knew for some time that he was considering retiring. So one of the things he was very clear about was the development of our corporate plan that became the plan I launched in April was very much a team effort. And it was very much about him saying, I'm not the future. Okay. All of you around the table are. So the first thing that happened really when I was appointed to a team who already agreed with the strategic direction we were going in because we'd developed this ourselves. The second thing I'd say then is really strange to take over a £39 billion business locked in, stuck in your dining room table.
Of course.
Because if you remember, that January was that awful second lockdown when, January's a dreadful month anyway, but to be locked in your house. So trying to take over as the chief exec from that point of view, where your natural instinct is to get out, to meet people, to walk the floor. That was really, really hard. But I've got a brilliant exec team who have gone from being my colleagues to being my direct reports. They were so supportive all the way through the process and have remained so. And we have a relationship that we work hard at. So we invest time as a team. We take time out to develop as individuals and as a team. We operate what we call radical candor, where any of us can say anything about how things are going, what our fears, what our concerns are, what our worries are about other parts of the business. People are encouraged never to stay in their own lane. People are encouraged to get involved, and that has just continued. As I say, a wonderful bunch of people. I'm very, very lucky. I don't just sit in my hands with that. As I say, I keep making sure that we take time out to develop as a team and continue to.
Out of interest, because you mentioned there around radical candour, and I think that's really important, particularly in the sector that we're currently operating in, or should I say the backdrop of that. How do you create a culture of radical candour where clearly feedback and continuous improvement is so important?
Well, it's back to this point of taking time out to work around the subjects. So, for example, each of our executive team meetings will start with a check-in.
Okay.
Where it's almost like getting to know each other, but also getting to know what's worrying you, what's concerning you, what's a distraction for you from this meeting, so that you're not just straight into the first item on our agenda will generally be health and safety. So you're not straight into that subject. You're sharing and you're getting to know each other. We also talk then, as a team, we've done some work on things like hotspots and hot buttons, what presses our buttons. And that really helps in the relationship. We also do insights, so we understand how we work, how we operate. So, for example, I've got one person on the team who's brilliant at detail and data, and cannot make a decision unless they're very clear on what the data is telling them. And then at the other end, you've got somebody who's just a fiery red director who just wants to tell everybody what to do. But we know that about ourselves, and we know that about each other. So we share that information and insight into our personalities and how we work. The act of taking that time out away from the day-to-day agenda to think about how we work together, what is likely to press our buttons. It means then that when you come to some really difficult discussions and difficult decisions, this year, for example, the budget constraints this year are tough. You're doing it from a point of view of understanding each other. Yeah. And that then breeds that radical candour in a sort of natural way, really.
Definitely.
So it's not forced.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea that but it's also constant. That just because you've had that check-in, then you don't do that for a few months because you've already ticked that box as such. But it comes from an authentic place as well that you're wanting to always evolve. Just talking back of when you first took the role, then Fiona. You took over from a very well-known figurehead in the housing sector, someone regarded as a legend of the housing industry, David Montague. He was very much known for growth and his famous pledge of 100,000 homes in the decade. You're then now taking the business in a very different direction. So how does that feel for yourself? David
is absolutely amazing. And I have learned so much from 3 years working with David and a decade of observing him from outside L&Q. Absolutely genius. David's decisions and David's ambitions for the organisation were right for L&Q at that time. Yeah. But circumstances change, things move on. So what was hitting us as David was making decisions about moving on was fire safety, for example, and having a bill potentially of 450 million to make sure that our residents were safe in tall buildings. That was hitting us. But also it was very clear from some of the data we were getting from either complaints or from our stock condition surveys that we needed to invest in the existing homes. And that was also becoming clear towards the end of David's time. And to give him absolute credit, he recognised that as he was preparing to retire from L&Q. So that developing that new corporate strategy, our future shape, was very much, he took a back seat because he knew that the future was going to be very different from in his day, where growth was the main driver. So yeah, it's been interesting taking over from such a legend. But you know, his words to me were brilliant as he left. He said, "I'm handing it over in a better condition than I found it, and your job is to do the same.
Yeah.
You're simply, your job is a trustee, a curator, to hand something better on to the next chief exec, and that's what I will be doing. I will be concentrating on the 120,000 homes we already have, as well as building 3,000. But the growth will be a lot less in this phase of leadership."
I absolutely love that around the trustee and passing the baton on as such. And you talk about kind of taking that on and changing that strategic plan as such, Fiona, but also we're both very much aware there is significant media scrutiny and the sector is under so much pressure now. So given all the distractions, how are you blocking out the media attention and focusing on the job at hand?
Well, I'm not blocking out the media attention because I think it's important to listen.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, God, it's tough sometimes. It really is tough. The one thing I do tend to block out is Twitter, because I just think that's a really unhelpful media.
Yeah.
But lots of the coverage by, say, Quajo, I think he has been fantastic in lots of ways for the sector, because, you know, he pulls us up.
Yeah.
You know, he will send me a note or text me or ring me, and you know he's only doing that because he cares so much. And what he was sort of reintroducing is this concept of care that maybe some of us had forgotten about. So I don't blot it out because there's learning to be had in it. I do think some of it is possibly slightly misleading. And I do think we also need to be a bit ballsier, frankly, in calling it out when some media outlets, frankly, have got it wrong. I am very concerned about increasing the stigma associated with social housing, particularly through some of the media campaigns being run at the minute. Because if one of the legacies of post-Grenfell Britain is that we reduce the stigma associated with living in social housing, I don't think some of the approach of media at the minute is right, because it's more or less saying that the entire sector is we're slum landlords and everybody's living in abject misery. That isn't the case. You know, we will do at L&Q, we'll do about 500,000 repairs a year.
Wow.
And occasionally that goes wrong, but if you're going to do 500,000, it will go wrong, naturally. I'm afraid. And what we have to do is minimise it going wrong. And when it does go wrong, got to act fast and make sure that our residents are looked after and not inconvenienced at one end of the scale or just left at the other end of the scale. So we've, we're not on moral high ground in any way. We've got to work far harder at getting it right. But at the same time, we've got to call out the fact that we might actually be contributing to more stigma if we're not careful. Yeah,
that's a really good point. And we take it now into L&Q, and Claire, you've gone through quite a bit of a journey over the last couple of years, because back in October 2019, you completed the acquisition of Trafford Housing Trust. So for those who aren't aware, Trafford Housing Trust is a housing association in the Northwest. And then in March this year, Trafford and L&Q came together as one organisation. So can you just talk to us a bit more about that journey that you've been on with Trafford Housing Trust?
Words of the Spice Girls, two became one. So, and that was it was a fascinating journey for us, because the roots of both associations were actually kind of similar in terms of our ethos, our culture, what we cared about. We were so impressed with a lot of the work that Trafford were doing in their particular bit of the Northwest, particularly around customer services. And we agreed when we first came together that we'd take 5 years to complete the two becomes one. We did it in 4 years in the end, because we just found that as we worked ever closer together, we got to know each other, and it just felt right for us. What has been brilliant is being able to take some of the brilliant working from Trafford and make that a national approach. Yeah. So, for example, you'll have seen Sharon Burns, our fabulous Director of Housing Management, in some of the trade press recently, talking about the changes to the housing management teams in L&Q, reducing patch sizes, making them more responsible for areas rather than just narrow siloed subjects. That's still in its infancy, but so far so good. It's going really well, and that's an idea that we took from the Northwest. And then going the other way, some of the work of L&Q's foundation and working closely on investment in the Northwest with Foundation in the Northwest has also been, just a brilliant sort of mini levelling up by L&Q. Now, all of that is under immense pressure from budgets this year, but we will continue to do what we can together. And do you know what? It's also been fabulous fun to get to know a different part of the country. Lots of similar problems. If you take the tram line from, say, Stretford out to Altrincham, the life expectancy on each stop as you get closer to Altrincham improves. At the Stretford end, I think there's a 10-year life expectancy difference between Stretford and Altrincham.
Wow.
You try to buy a house in Altrincham, it's as, if not more expensive than many of the areas we work in London and the Southeast. Yeah. So the idea of affordability just being a London and the Southeast issue is rubbish. It's affordability is an issue everywhere. Stock condition. There are lots of places we're working, like Preston, for example. The condition of existing homes, wonderful old Victorian terraces, it's not in a brilliant state. So hopefully we can make a contribution to that by building new homes and investing in the stock we have in the Northwest. Yeah. But it's been tough at times because, let's be honest, we were a 110,000 home organisation, frankly taking over a 10,000 home organisation, and that can cause tension. Yeah. And it has, but we've worked through it. We appointed, through your help, Tom, a brilliant Matt Foreman, who led our transition and integration and has now gone on to be appointed National Group Director for Customer Services. So, yeah, we really have come together seamlessly now. Yeah. There are lots of ex-Trafford people in very key positions in the national organisation.
Fantastic. And you talk about there, Fiona, I think we can both agree that from maybe not Trafford, but from a northern perspective, and particularly Northwest, the reception in the Northwest wasn't probably as warm as you first envisaged in those initial conversations. So what I'm really keen to know, what work did you have to do to improve that image?
The first thing you've got to do is go and actually talk to people. Doing that face-to-face has been brilliant. I'll give you an example. Last July, we did a series of staff roadshows in Trafford. So we sort of got all of the Trafford staff to come and meet us in various sessions. It was the hottest day of the year. I don't know if you remember that. It nearly hit 40 degrees. We were all rushing to get the last train because Network Rail said they weren't going to run any trains for 2 days because the tracks were buckling. But what was hilarious was standing on the stage talking to everybody from Trafford and then walking around the tables and chatting to people, and they said, "You don't sound like a Londoner." But that's your typical Londoner. Actually, is somebody who, for usually economic reasons, works in London because I graduated into a property recession and the only place I could get a job was London. Yeah. So here I am. And that was really interesting. So our exec team, a very mixed bunch as well. There's a smattering of Londoners, as you'd expect, but, Matt is from the Northeast. So, yeah, we're not quite what you see. But you also have to respect the existing ecosystem in housing, particularly in the Northwest. There are partnerships there that have been working really effectively for years and doing brilliant stuff. And rather than coming in with the big I am, one of the first things we did was appoint a partnerships director for the Northwest from the Northwest. So Ali Heald, who's absolutely brilliant. It's just incredibly well connected there. So rather than me coming in with my I'm Group Chief Exec of L&Q, it's more about, how can we help, and quietly helping and supporting. Yeah. So the ecosystem really matters in other places, and you disturb that at your peril. Yeah. And that's what we've tried not to do, is just try to quietly support where we can.
And out of interest in the future now, Fiona, the organisations are one, so it is L&Q. And what are the plans moving forward for the Northwest?
The plans remain pretty much as they were in 2019. Obviously, budget pressures are putting pressure on our ability to invest and to grow. But I see these as short-term, sort of 3 to 5 year constraints. The long-term ambition is still to build significantly in the Northwest. I'd love us to be able to do major urban regeneration, something akin to the Barking Riverside development that we've got in East London, which is taking really contaminated brownfield lands and just rejuvenating and regenerating an area. We'd love to be able to do something of that scale in the Northwest, which is the real advantage of being a big financially sound housing association. We like to keep working with our local authority partners, particularly Trafford Council, where Trafford was originally a stock transfer organisation. Keep working with them to support. Say, one of the projects that the team in Trafford have been looking at is foster carers and the need for larger accommodation, for example. So what can we do practically to help? And then just keeping, through Ali's work, keeping really linked in with what's happening in the Northwest, because I think it's got a scale that works and can try new ideas that we can then look at for other parts of the country. One of the brilliant schemes that we run in the Northwest is Clean Start, which works with people leaving prison. Trains them to work with us for caretaking, grounds maintenance, cleaning, that sort of thing, and gives people a second chance, really. And it's been utterly brilliant. There's a wonderful woman who runs that called Deborah Agar, and we've calculated she has saved the Home Office about 20 million in the last decade.
Wow.
Just on stopping people reoffending.
It's incredible.
So it's just brilliant things.
That is brilliant. So lots to look forward to as well. And you talk about budget constraints over this next couple of years, and it is going to be tough. The outlook isn't great at the moment. For a lot of boards, M&A is a strategic priority, naturally so, given what we've just spoken about. What advice would you give to boards and chief execs that are having those conversations, similar to what you've had with Trafford?
Absolutely. I think there's going to be more of it, Tom. I think that I worry about some of the medium-sized associations financially and how they're going to cope with this. We're wondering what this year's rent settlement could look like. We're wondering if inflation is really going to be under control by the end of the year. I'm not optimistic on that. So advice I'd give them, the first thing to do is, there's a great expression called take a beat. Just take a breath. Don't rush. Don't rush into anything. You've got to understand motivations on both sides. Why are you doing this? Why do they want you to do this? And one really major piece of learning for us at L&Q was to be very clear if it's a merger or an acquisition. It's really interesting that was a piece of learning. We now, with hindsight, I'd say we acquired 7 different organisations in 12 years. Because of our size, it's almost always an acquisition. And you've got to be honest about that right at the beginning. And you've got to say things like, well, it'll be L&Q systems or L&Q logos or whatever it is. Those are the minor, niggly little details that really irritate people as the process goes. But also what was interesting about Trafford and very different from when we took over East Thames was geography. So because it's a completely different geographical area, it's discreet almost. Like the Trafford team keep doing what they've always done in Trafford. Whereas in East London, for example, L&Q had a lot of stock in East London, so did East Thames. When the two came together, there was a lot more confusion and a lot more duplication of roles that needed to be resolved, which again causes pain and tension for individuals involved in that process. So just take a breath would be the...
Take a beat.
Very much strong advice. Do not rush headlong into things, and make sure there are lots of reasons to acquire and to merge, but just remind yourself the question that you're trying to answer.
Brilliant. Really, really useful advice for you. And final question from me is well, congratulations. You are now the newly appointed chair of the G15. Can you talk to us?
Yes.
This is going to be quite a significant job as well, along with the day job. I mean, what are the priorities as the new chair of the G15?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so honoured that my colleagues at G15 are keen for me to do this. I'm following in some amazing shoes with Geeta.
Yeah.
I think she's done an amazing job following Helen. Real change in culture within G15, far more collaborative, far more sharing, which is great. So priorities for me, I mean, the first one has to be around the image and reputation of the sector. That has to be constant because it bleeds into all sorts of things. It bleeds into investor confidence.
Yes.
It bleeds into reputation in terms of trying to recruit talent. So we've got to keep looking at that all of the time. Another issue for me is around resident voice. So we've got the new consumer standards. How are we as organisations really listening to our customers, and what can we do as a collective G15? You'll be aware that there are lots of pieces of research at the moment that people who live in London are more unhappy than the rest of the country.
Yeah.
For all sorts of reasons. So, and that means resident satisfaction living in London, because you're living very cheek by jowl on top of each other, can be a lot lower. So what can we collectively do, and how can we listen to residents? We have an ethnicity pledge, the G15, and I'm really interested in some practical work around how do we change the face of leadership to far more reflect the diversity of London, particularly. And things like we run, G15 run an Accelerate program for our leaders from Black and minority communities. And what are we doing to actually support them into career progression and new jobs? So it's one thing to support them through this degree level, master's level qualification, but what then? So is that sponsorship? How do we make sure that this talent is then utilised for the good of the sector? And then finally, I want to do something practical. So I'll give you an example. In London, at the minute, L&Q have one roofing company for 80,000 homes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I'd love to know, I don't know what the answer is, but is there something that we could practically do to try and improve repairs and maintenance services in London? Now, I know we're talking to the NatFed about this as larger associations. What can we do? But I'd love to do something, something real that I could point to say, yeah, we made that difference to people's lives because, I don't know, the G15 roofing company. I don't know what it'll be. It'll be something practical, though.
Sounds fantastic. And like you say, you talk about the point that David gave to you around being a trustee. And as you say there, Geeta and Helen have done some fantastic things over the years. But I'm sure just given some of those strategic priorities, Fiona, you will certainly take it into a great space as well. I mean, just with that being said, I mean, kind of a lot of executives and chief executives come to me and say, we're really keen to increase my portfolio in work and take on another non-executive role along with the day job. They are two very big roles that you're doing. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to take to increase their portfolio along with the day job?
So I also chair the Centre for London as well at the same time. You've got to be realistic about the time commitment. Yeah. Now, G15 is a useful addition to a chief exec in a London Housing Association because it opens doors for you, and you get to have regular conversations with government officials, for example, or with the Mayor of London's office. So that complements your day job. So that's quite useful. What then, when I took over as chair of trustees for the Centre for London, that was more about a passion and an interest. So I'm really interested in the economics of a big city and how it works. And, I'm interested in equity and poverty in places like London, which is immense, despite how it might seem to the outside world. So that's a personal passion. And that means you're motivated to do it. And the other one is it complements your day job. So time commitment would be the big thing. It is all of these things take time. And also, clearing it with your chair. I mean, my chair and board are very, very supportive of the G15 role, particularly because they see the benefits for L&Q, if nothing else. But if you don't have the backing and full support of your chair and board, be very, very careful about this.
Yeah.
And also, neither of them are paid, which is another thing you've got to think about. You are paid to do a job as a chief exec, and taking another paid role is really, it's not impossible, but I do think you just need to be careful.
Really good advice. Fiona, before I let you go, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, we do have some quick fire questions.
Lovely.
So I'll keep it straight to the point. So what has been the most valuable leadership lesson you've learned?
Well, I'm the eldest of 5 kids, and I remember my dad telling me when I was 9, people respond better if you ask them to do things rather than instruct them. And that's served me well.
That is fantastic advice. What advice would you give to an aspiring leader starting out on their journey?
Volunteer for everything that's going. I stuck my hand up once to implement an IT system and manage the mortuaries. Just give it a go. I was a shop steward for a trade union. Just volunteer.
Great. And what do you believe, given the current circumstances, what do you believe to be the key leadership qualities required in today's world?
It's a combination of both curiosity and resilience.
And one leadership book recommendation that you give to the listeners?
Now, I'm not sure it's a leadership book, but it really is a fantastic book for any leader. It's Matthew Said, Black Box Thinking.
Brilliant.
Just wonderful. So it is about how you solve problems by sharing and operating in a transparent way. He shows how the airline industry gets safer every time you get in a plane, because when something goes wrong, even near misses, everybody brings everything they know to the table. Whereas the NHS over a number of years has possibly got a little less safe, because there's clinicians are encouraged through the legal process to keep their hands around problems and not share what went wrong.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you ever so much for joining us on the Housing Collective podcast, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon.
Absolutely. Lovely to see you, Tom.